Tasawwuf in itself, there is nothing wrong with that. It's just the way you're practicing it. And I mentioned some ideas that would go against Islam in itself, you know. Certain moves, certain ideas, and certain groups we have nowadays a lot of Sufi groups that are far away from practicing the deen. So in the case of Ibn Khaldun, he clearly followed the idea of Sufism, mentions also a saint, the idea and the belief of saints, which, by the way, is not an original Islamic idea. You know, we don't have saints in Islam. This is something that reminds me very much of the Orthodox people. The Orthodox in Greece, in Serbia, and Russia, the Orthodox celebrate, actually, I don't know if you're aware of that, but Orthodox people, Orthodox Christians, do not celebrate birthdays traditionally. Nowadays they do it because of having entered the 21st century, everything okay. But in general, the Orthodox religion actually does not support birthdays, but very strongly supports the idea of your name's day. Your name is connected to your saint. So my name is Stephanos actually originally, okay? So my saint would be the saint, the holy Stephen, okay? He would be, so you would have on the day that they celebrate Stephanos, they also celebrate Stephania, you know, the female version of it, and so on. And you would see in the Athenian metro, for example, the underground stations, you will see on that day, you know, where you see the temperature, the date.
This video is sponsored by the Muqaddima program.
For nearly 7 centuries, Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddima has been read and studied by scholars and students of history, sociology, politics and economics as the single most authoritative and astounding work of classical scholarship in the field of history.
Embark on an enlightening educational venture led by Muslim scholars and teachers delving into Islamic history, sociology, economics and beyond. Engage with cutting-edge learning cues and multimedia components, allowing for a deeper understanding of the topics. Distinguish between the lies and the truths of the narratives told, between reliable and unreliable sources. Equip yourself with the skills to conduct deep research and build confidence to combat Islamophobia. Come and strengthen your Muslim identity today. Grab the course in the video description.
Also see, today we celebrate Stephanos and Stephania, for example. Tomorrow, Marcos and Mark, whatever. So this is part of the ancient, the Orthodox belief, which the Byzantines were Orthodox. We shouldn't forget that. And I don't know if this is something that influenced the Sufis of that time and nowadays to do that, to copy this kind of idea.
Well,
but I know that the Ottomans, for example, who were extremely Sufi, but you will find Sufism a lot in the Ottoman Empire, and I know that they actually wanted to be the next Byzantine Empire, be considered the next Byzantine rulers, okay? And there I would say they did copy a lot from the Byzantines. So yeah, I think
there is a lot. I think this is quite a contentious topic because Ibn Khaldun doesn't explicitly claim to belong to any tariqah. He doesn't claim to be a Sufi of any fraternity. Although it can be said in his day and age, Sufia was actually the de facto form of Islam. It was practiced by pretty much everyone everywhere. So I think we can conclude that he was a Sufi of some sort, but there's no explicit reference to a Sufi tariqah, to a guide, to a specific ritual. He does actually, in fact, condemn a few Sufis of ancient times, Ibn Arabi, al-Hallaj, for example, for their excess in certain rituals. What is interesting, and I believe Ibn Khaldun actually makes a very good distinction, is he talks of Sufi in the early ages, in the early days of Islam, and what he proposes is that this existed even in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. It was expressed differently. It's only because of the excess that came later on with the material elements, Muslims become very wealthy, very politically involved, that there was a need to reformulate the spiritual elements and to call it something and to organize the rituals by which people could actually ascend to another realm. So I know from a modern perspective we have a very different view of Sufia, but I think the way he expressed it and the way he communicates it is for me close to the truth, because there was a time in history when everybody was a Sufi, pretty much. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi.
The issue of saint worship is
well,
something that we have to condemn.
This is contemptuous because not every Sufi does that. If we're very honest,
he does.
yeah.
Okay, what you're speaking about Ibn
mention
Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun actually not only mentions that, he makes it very clear
puts
that
in
he
his
does
system.
believe
He puts in his
that it's
system
part
of
of his
Worshipping
belief as well.
saints.
But not necessarily worshipping
Worshipping
saints,
saints,
but that
well,
there are
well,
saints.
there are
Venerating.
saints that there.
Well, okay, so this is an issue of language, because the word is wali, awliya, which the Quran mentions. Awliya Allah. This is very clear in Quran.
So it's a translation that is a problem.
Well, saint has a certain connotation to it.
Right, right.
You're right, we don't have a sainthood in Islam. We don't canonize people. We don't have sainthood in Islam. We do have friends of Allah, the awliya, and Allah mentions this in the Quran several times. The Muslims of the past utilize this terminology to describe somebody of close proximity to that which we consider to be friends, to be a friend of Allah, specifically speaking. And the Sufis in that language, which is translated as sainthood, I think it's actually not appropriate to use sainthood to describe this word.
Right, okay.
Awliya
I
specifically
agree with that,
says,
yes.
yes.
They do that a lot actually, just taking their understanding of specific...
The closest meaning.
And taking it over monastery, also the for techniques and so on and so on.
Yes.
They do that, that's right. Okay, Jazakallah khair, that was actually a good clarification, because I was wondering, and you're right, that if you translate that into
As
English,
saints, exactly.
then it would be actually a mistranslation in that way.
It is, because there are different connotations to it, exactly, which Islam doesn't have. Islam doesn't have.
But Sufism, I believe, is a topic that has to be expounded upon, because, strictly speaking, historically speaking, the vast majority of the empires and the dynasties were of some Sufi leaning. The Ottomans being the greatest example. Every sultan had a murshid, a guide, a spiritual guide. Every one of them. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, the Mamluks, they all had some sort of spiritual guide, or spiritual exercises. So it's an element of history we cannot deny in Islam. It's a matter of how do we unpack it, how do we understand it, how do we interpret it
as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Which Ibn Khaldun condemns. As I said before, he condemned Ibn Arabi in this concept of the divine unity, you know, Godhood being in everyone and everything. He condemns that. He also condemns Al-Hallaj, who said something very similar in terms of I am God, right, in his own understanding. So he's very clear in distinguishing between Orthodox Islam, and in fact what he does say is that it has to be organized and really almost regulated, Sufism, because there are many charlatans and people who take advantage of the system to make money for themselves. So I think it is important to really characterize it in the right way, you know, real characterization of what he meant and what he was living through. But I would say it is undeniable that he would have been at some point affiliated to some sort of movements.
Especially then, at his time around 10th century to 14th century, there was a massive movement with regards to the occult, as we mentioned, with regards to spirituality, with regards to a certain spiritual revival in some way, especially in North Africa.
Absolutely.
And I think
don't we need to mention there, so Yasser, exactly.
And I think that
why
plays
it was
a
like
massive
this?
role in in pushing towards pushing that, or rather the fertility of the ground for the occult and for spiritual involvement of the populace of North Africa.
Yes. People were dying left and right and up and down, so it was the time of the plague.
You had
it was the
previous
time of the
prosperous
Mongols after.
cities, their population cut in half and further. So yes, that plays a massive role. And again, it moves on to the other point we want to discuss with regards to the apocalypse, or the apocalyptic viewpoint of the scholars, not just Ibn Khaldun, of the scholars of that time. Their viewpoints, their works were from the viewpoint of ruins, of destruction, of decay, of an apocalyptic viewpoint. Because again, Black Death, and then later on you have the Mongols as well, Yajuj and Majuj, many of them thought, etc., etc. So that plays a role in the works they produce, that plays a role in their viewpoint of the world. And their viewpoint, most of them, nearly all of them, including Ibn Khaldun, was we are the end of times.
There was almost a messianic movement at the time, and we'll get into it in more detail. There were many people who claimed to be the Mahdi, so that's
he has a lot to say about that.
There is a lot. But I think overall, I think the role of Sufism cannot be denied in his book. It's very clear that he has admiration, inclination, involvement in that world. And in fact, he was assigned as one of the guardians of the greatest and biggest, most lavish khandaks, which is a Sufi lodge in Egypt. Sultan Baybar's Khandak, he was in charge of that. So he clearly had some sort of affiliation of some sort. We just don't know which tariqa, which fraternity he belonged to, and what practices he practiced.
Now, for the very first time, students of Islamic history will have the rare and unique opportunity to study this monumental and classical work of genius under the tutelage and guidance of experts in the field of research and education. To find out more about the Muqaddima program or to enlist yourself onto this unique and fantastic learning journey, please visit our website at www.al-Muqaddima.com, where you will be able to download our program prospectus, register your interest by submitting an application directly via the online enrollment form.